Thank you for joining today's event. We will begin shortly. Thank you for joining. Please enjoy today's event.
Good afternoon. I'm Sherry Gleed, Dean of NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. Welcome to the latest collaboration between NYU Wagner and the Century Foundation. Welcome to our esteemed speaker and to our guests. As artificial intelligence continues to evolve, it's really critical that workers' concerns are considered in the development of policy around this new technology. Today, you're going to hear a conversation focused on the workplace impacts of AI and how to best protect workers from its downsides while ensuring that they benefit as much as possible from AI's promises of increased productivity. We understand that we may have some individuals with low vision joining us today, so to help us set the stage for them, I'd like to ask our speakers to please describe yourself and your setting before you speak. I am in my home office, which is painted blue, sitting in front of a white bookcase and wearing a blue blazer. Before we get started with the body of our event today, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. Please note that this event is being recorded and live streamed. If you would like to submit a question for our panelists, please do so using the chat feature. Now, please welcome my colleague and friend, Mark Zuckerman, President of the Century Foundation.
Sherry, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm so pleased you could all join us today. I'm Mark Zuckerman, President of the Century Foundation. I'm here in my Washington, D.C. office with a blue blazer and a blue shirt. For those of you not familiar with the Century Foundation, we're a progressive think tank that pursues economic, racial, gender, and disability equity in healthcare, the economy, and in education. Today, we're discussing workplace impacts of AI, one of the most critical policy challenges for the next generation. Specifically, how can we protect both workers from AI downsides while ensuring workers share in any benefits that AI brings to our economy? It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Chike Agu, Senior Advisor at the Project on Workforce at Harvard. Chike was appointed by President Biden on day one of the administration to serve as Chief Innovation Officer at the U.S. Department of Labor. There, he led efforts to use data and emerging technologies to protect American workers. We'll hear from Chike first with a presentation that will set the stage for today's presentation. Then we'll pass it on to moderators, Jody Kellermine, who's led Century's labor work and soon will become the AFL-CIO's new Director of Advocacy, and Terry Gerstein, who leads NYU Wagner's Labor Initiative. Thank you again for joining us. Over to you, Chike.
Mark, thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Chike Agu, currently at the Project on Workforce at Harvard University. I'm wearing a blue shirt, blue tie, gray pinstripe suit, and I'm in an office with a gray wall and a painting behind me. And I just want to thank the Century Foundation and all of my colleagues for having this conversation today, which I think is one of the most important conversations we can have. What I want to do is first define our terms. I want to talk about some of the critical questions, and I want to talk about, I think, a little bit of a charge for a group like this, and frankly, all of you who are watching here who care about this, and I think how it plays in the economy and the future of the country. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, well, let's define what that is. Artificial intelligence are machines that are built to simulate the way the human brain acts. and that can make decisions in some ways the way that people do. When we talk about generative artificial intelligence, or Gen AI for short, we are talking about these types of machines that can be used to develop content like video, pictures, data, even software code. These generative artificial intelligence tools are built on what are called large language models. These are models that use billions of pieces of information to help these artificial intelligence tools work like the human brain and create content like we've previously described. So I want to define our terms so that term AI is used a lot, but let's really be clear about what that means. So when we talk about what does that mean, it's coming to our discourse like a meteorite because of tools like ChatGPT, like Bard from Google, Inflection AI can name probably another 10, or I'm sure you all can name many others that have popped up in your daily life. When we talk about AI and the impact it's going to have on workers and on the economy, I like to go from short term to long term. So in the short term, biggest challenge is not will AI or the robots come and take all of our jobs. The biggest challenge short term is one actually that the CEO of OpenAI named about a year ago. What he basically said was, in the short term, workers with AI skills will outcompete and obviate those who don't. And so I think our biggest challenge short term is how do we make sure that workers, all workers, no matter who they are, where they live, what they look like, can use these tools. Why do I think that's so important? Because AI is going to become as ubiquitous as Microsoft Office, as Google Search. No one here who could hire anyone would hire someone who couldn't use Google Search. You would say that person is not career ready. These tools like ChatGPT, like Claude, like Bard are going to be like that. And so we need to make sure that every worker, I think about workers like the community that I live in Prince George's County, Maryland, which is a majority Black county, with unemployment usually far above the Maryland average, that those workers who are most left out have access to those tools and it doesn't become another digital divide in the coming century. That's one. Two, as we go even a little further out, short to medium term, the question is what will be the guardrails on how this technology is used? How do we make sure that, for example, if AI is used in resume screening, that it's not used as a way to screen out workers who, frankly, don't look like the majority of workers who already work there and, frankly, could actually do the job? We need to make sure that those guardrails are in place and that workers, the people who are actually going to be affected, have a voice, because that will mean that not only is it more equitable, it's also be more accurate. Thirdly, we need to really hone in on how do we use these tools to accurately increase worker productivity. Meaning, how do we use these tools so that workers can do more? And again, I think about my own career. I started my career as a teacher almost 20 years ago. And I think about the percent of time I spent teaching versus a bunch of other stuff that was more administration or trivia. If we could use generative AI for these professions that are so critical to our economy, we can make those workers more productive, make them more valuable so they can make more money, and also help them help the people that they serve. This is the beginning and the really to frame the conversation, but I want to end off with one last thing, which is there's a conversation about what type of future is AI going to create. Will it be some type of techno utopia? Will it be some type of techno apocalypse? And the answer is no one really knows. And I'd argue that answer is up to us, the people who are on this call, the people who are watching this right now. And I think now is the time to start, because even though it may feel like this is all happening right now, there will still be a lot of time between now and when that future comes about. And we have the time to shape it, create it, and make it the type of future that we want ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren to have. So I thank Century so much for having this conversation. I look so forward to hearing from my colleagues. And Jody, I want to turn it to you to help kick us off.
Thank you, Chike, very much. We're now going to move into a discussion on AI and workers. My name is Jody Calamine. I am wearing a blue suit and tie. I'm seated in an office in Washington, D.C. with a window overlooking the street. I would like to start by welcoming our esteemed panelists. In addition to Chike, we have Munir Ahmad, who is Senior Counselor to the Secretary at the United States Department of Labor. We have Michelle Miller, Director of Innovation at the Center for Labor and a Just Economy at Harvard Law School, and Yolanda Sherrod, who is Executive Vice President for Mobility at the Communications Workers of America, Local 3519. A lot of the talk on artificial intelligence is often hypothetical. So I'd like to turn to a concrete example of artificial intelligence in the workplace. Yolanda, you serve as a vice president of your local. You are also an employee at a call center in Mississippi, and I'd like you to just share with all of us your experience in the workplace with artificial intelligence.
Sure. Hello, my name is Yolanda. I'm currently in Biloxi, Mississippi. I'm wearing a black dress with curly hair and sitting in my office with yellow walls. So I have been a call center worker for over 18 years. And I want to share some of my experiences about AI and how it has impacted my job for the most part. AI is unable to handle complex tasks required to effectively assist customers. It frequently provides incorrect information, such as falsely informing customers about credits on their account, which are actually due to device promotions. This results in a negative customer experience as I have to correct the mistake and explain the situation to the customer. My customer interactions have been altered due to the importance of human skills like creativity, empathy, and strategic thinking in enhancing the customer experience. These skills also greatly impact my job performance. As someone in a sales role, the increasing presence of chatbots and automation has led to decreased sales and reduced commission. The use of AI in tracking my breaks and lunches also creates a feeling of having a second manager, which diminishes my sense of independence. Now, we also have something called auto notation, where it automatically notes the account based on the customer response and your response to the customer. Now, the auto notation mistakes are not just bad for me as a representative, but it also impacts customers, especially our seniors. They often have to call multiple times for an issue. And if the notes are not right, it forces the next representative to start from the beginning. This slows down company time, makes it hard to service customers, and make customers more irritable with the representatives who have to try to resolve these issues that this technology has created. While I understand that the theory that AI could be useful to help workers, the systems that we use don't make it feel like that is the true purpose of this technology. AI developers and companies must remember that you cannot undervalue the importance of a human connection. Some of the things that a customer calls about can't be found in an information portal. You have to use the human intuition and creativity to determine how best to help them. AI is meant to be helpful in assisting with serving more customers, but it frequently hinders my productivity.
Thank you, Yolanda. Michelle, a bit of what Yolanda was touching upon is, it sounds like AI is affecting her working conditions in certain ways. And it sounds like it is replacing some human work in her workplace. I would ask you, what do you think the most urgent labor policy questions are presented by AI?
Thank you so much, Jody. And Yolanda, thank you for your really vivid description of what you're dealing with. I'm Michelle Miller. I am sitting in my home office in Brooklyn, New York. I'm wearing a white button-down shirt and I have brown hair. And I think that the important thing to do when we're first thinking about urgent labor policy is to really set the scene here. What Yolanda describes is actually the experience that many workers who are put in the position to engage in, what I would describe as experimentation with artificial intelligence without their consent are going to be facing over the next probably 10 years, working environments that require them to smooth operations, to engage with clunkiness, to fix failed experiments with artificial intelligence inside their workplaces. We know that call centers are having their work augmented by artificial intelligence. The other work area that is most likely to have the day-to-day tasks of their work in the short term augmented by artificial intelligence are people working in what is called business operations, which are people who do payroll, people who do auditing, people who do human resources. And when you think about that, and you think about both the workers that do that work, which are heavily women, which are people who maybe don't make the lowest wages, but they make the second or third lowest wages, and therefore are often centers of stability in their families. And that the jobs that they do are so critical to smooth operations for every other worker in their company, to think about the fact that they will be in a position of mitigating the potential harms of clunky AI rollouts inside their workplaces really makes us think about what is the kind of voice that they need to have in the way that that technology is implemented. Because a payroll clerk is going to know that the AI is not quite working before anyone else is going to. But if they don't have a mechanism like Yolanda has through a union to say something about that, then they're going to be in the position of working overtime, doing additional work, and also always being threatened to eventually be replaced by that clunky AI as companies are implementing this technology. And there is a gold rush mentality. There is a kind of real energy right now in the business sector to say that businesses are using AI. And so what we're seeing is workers kind of having to engage in process smoothing with new products that haven't quite been tested in real time, so that their companies can say, we're integrating AI into our processes. So this isn't a question of like whether, you know, we don't want it at all. We do want to figure out how these products can be useful, but we also want to make sure that the workers who are being put in the position to do the work to implement these tools into their workflows are actually protected and compensated appropriately for the fact that they are essentially acting as test subjects to build technology for the future. The work that they're doing is not just the productive work that they're being paid for, but it's actually also work to build and improve and fix technologies that are being implemented inside their workplaces. So I think that we have to be really clear in terms of labor policy at the outset about sort of transparency. What are the tools actually designed to do? What is the information that they're collecting? Who is behind the scenes? We've seen a lot of examples of some AI actually relying on overseas workers to make it work. Like, what does the supply chain actually look like? And what are the ways in which we're ensuring that the workers who are actually the ones who are using this technology have a way to talk to their bosses and their employers about what the experience of actually having to integrate this technology into their day-to-day work is?
Thank you, Michelle. I'd like to turn to Munir. Michelle highlighted a few of the key issues, critical issues like transparency with respect to AI. The Department of Labor recently held a series of listening sessions on artificial intelligence. And could you tell us a bit of what were the key takeaways from those listening sessions?
Sure. Thank you, Jody. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. So as you mentioned, we held these listening sessions. This was in connection with work that the Department of Labor was assigned to do under a broad-reaching executive order that President Biden issued in October of last year that really charged the entirety of the federal government to start to develop policies regarding safe, secure, and trustworthy use of AI. I'll say at the outset that one of the values that is really lifted up in that executive order and which has informed the work of our department is the impact on workers, both to ensure that worker safety is a first order value in the government's thinking about AI, and to think about the ways in which government policy can ensure the fair and equitable participation in the benefits of AI should those benefits come to pass. And so it was in connection with the work that we were doing under that executive order that we held a series of listening sessions. And this was in connection with work we've done to develop principles and best practices for AI developers and and employers on exactly these questions of protecting workers from the adverse impacts of AI and ensuring their benefit from or their participation in the benefits of AI. In terms of takeaways, I would say that and this will, I think, resonate with what Michelle said and pick up on the really important insights from Yolanda about what it means to be in a workplace with a union. Because the North Star value that we have adopted in our work that was informed by a lot of these consultations was that worker empowerment is essential to the design, development, testing, training, procurement, use, and oversight of AI systems. And so ensuring that there is worker voice in each step of the consideration of AI and its development, as well as in its deployment, its evaluation, and its oversight. And I'll come back to that in a moment. There are a set of associated values that have been animating the work of the Department of Labor on this topic. So the first is that we should be designing and deploying AI for workers' benefit. So this is not just about harm mitigation, which of course is important, but also thinking about opportunity enhancement. What are the ways in which AI can be augmenting or complementary of workers to make their work easier, to make their work more satisfying, to make their work, to allow them to do their work with greater compensation. That should be part of how we think about the use of AI. And so that's the first of these values that's animating our work. The second is there obviously is a great deal of concern about worker displacement due to AI or replacement of workers due to AI. And we hear that from some of the leading technologists, futurists even, who suggest there may be huge job losses due to AI. It's something that under the executive order, the Department of Labor was charged with developing policy proposals, essentially steps that agencies could take to address displacement of workers that results from the adoption and the deployment of AI. With that in mind, one of the conclusions that we've reached is the best way to address displacement of workers due to AI is to prevent the displacement of workers due to AI in the first place. And we know from experience with other programs that once a worker is separated from their job, whether due to trade or to downsizing or through other prior waves of technological adoption, that those workers tend to have long periods of unemployment. And when they are reemployed, it tends to be at lower wages with fewer benefits and with less overall protections. And so the first approach, the first line of defense for displacement is to try to prevent displacement in the first place. Third, as I mentioned at the outset, the North Star principle about worker empowerment and worker voice, we believe the best way to ensure that workers have that voice is to ensure that workers can bargain collectively. We know that's not true in the majority of workplaces, but we see support for the right to organize and the right to bargain collectively as being a kind of right that produces benefits across the worker's experience, including in the realm of AI. Fourth, we know, and this will connect up a little bit to how Chike framed things at the beginning, we know that both the private sector and the government will need to train the workforce for an AI economy. This will be necessary to keep workers attached to their jobs rather than displacing them. It will be necessary for training a next generation of workers to be prepared for an AI economy. And it will be especially important to ensure that we are attending to equity in a new economy to, as Chike said, to make sure that we don't replicate a digital divide that we have long had based on prior waves of technology. And then the last principle that has been a part of our work has been that government should model the principles and best practices that we want AI developers and employers to adopt. So throughout government, there are already some early uses of AI. All of those uses are publicly disclosed. But part of what we are trying to do in the Department of Labor is to ensure that any consideration of AI embraces this set of values, including consultation with workers early on about whether it makes sense to use AI in the workplace, how to do so, and how to make sure that it is complementary of the work of existing workers rather than displacing of them.
Thanks very much. I heard worker voice, collective bargaining, phrases like that in your answer as part of a response to AI in the workplace. Yolanda, you're a union officer. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about how your union has approached artificial intelligence. What has your local or CWA been doing?
First thing we've been doing is making sure our voices are heard. Someone such as myself is making sure that the representatives are not being replaced by AI. So we've been doing that, and then also collective bargaining is a unique way that we tackle it as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Munir also said that preventing displacement would be an important thing to do in response to AI or to deal with AI. That seems difficult. I'm going to ask Chike, if in your opinion, there's a lot of talk about the robots replacing us. Is that talk overblown or underestimated? What do you think?
The answer is the promise and the peril are both real. That's how I always say it. The upside is real, the downside is real. And I think what we don't talk enough about is we talk about the jobs that will be replaced. No one knows how many of those are going to be. It's not going to be zero or potentially zero. But what we don't talk about is the jobs that will still exist, but that will be changed. And you heard Yolanda talk about it a little bit. The job of a call center operator now with AI is different than it was 15 years ago. She's described some of the upsides and downsides to that. An example that I use, and I use a lot, is the loan officer. If you think about a loan officer in the 80s, the job of a loan officer was you went into a bank, you brought in all your stuff, they read through all your stuff, and they served as an actuary, and they made the choice about whether you got a loan or not. The human being has not made a choice about who gets a loan or not in America in about 15 years. You go into a bank, they take all of your data and they put that into an algorithm. And that algorithm is what tells whether you get the loan or not. But they're still a loan officer. Now, the loan officer's job is just very different. They're a salesperson. They're what we call an account manager if you were in the private sector. And the question is, even though that job exists, it's an entirely different skill set of who can do it. And so now think about that across the economy. For the jobs that are changed, who's going to make sure that the workers who could do the job before can do it now? And so the one thing I say is we're lucky that we have a little bit of a lead on some of this. We know that this is going to happen tomorrow. The AI, as Yolanda first said, can't replace human beings. As she said it a number of times. As time goes on, it will get better. That's the nature of technology. Maybe it's still not ever replacing, but it'll get better. So as we have this lead time, how do we think about now? People who are in jobs that will be changed, how do we make sure that they have the skills, the capacities to do that? I'm going to name another thing that Munir's current boss and my old boss were big fans of: apprenticeship. If we think about what's going to be even more valuable for workers in the future, it's going to be those things that only human beings can do: interacting with other human beings, leadership, communication, all those things that we call intangible skills, but that we likely learn from someone who was older than us on the job. That's going to be even more important now. And it's why this administration, I was part of this administration, and I'm proud to say it, was making sure that apprenticeship was a bigger and bigger part of how we train workers in America, because it's going to help make them better at the things that a machine will likely never do. And so I think one of the key things that's going to be part of that better future that we're going to create is that type of training. But I think the answer is we don't totally know, but we need to talk about the jobs that are going to be changed, not just the ones that might potentially go away. So long answer to your question, but I think it shows how complicated the topic is.
Yes, thank you. And besides the displacement question, another question you raised in your presentation was the question of guardrails. That when AI does appear in a workplace, should there be guardrails? And I think there have been, the way I have looked at some of the policy proposals out there on regulating AI, they seem to fall into a couple buckets. One is a bucket where transparency is emphasized over practically everything else, that with transparency, we might understand whether AI is violating existing laws like the National Labor Relations Act and the right to organize, or Title VII and rights against workplace discrimination. A second bucket is a more direct regulatory bucket. We're seeing some of this out of the European Union, where there are proposals to ban outright certain forms of artificial intelligence. And then a third bucket, I suppose, would be something that we've seen recently from a paper out of the Economic Policy Institute, which is that technology is always a potential threat to work and how work is done. The real question isn't the technology itself. That is, the problem isn't so much AI itself as it is the imbalance of power between workers and employers. And if workers have a voice, they can deal with it, the displacement or the guardrail questions, workplace by workplace. And so I wanted to throw this question out to anybody who wants to answer it. Where do you fall in the spectrum? Did I get the spectrum right? Transparency, direct regulation, worker power. Where should worker advocates focus their attention?
I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Michelle.
So I think it's kind of a walk and chew gum problem, honestly. Of course, transparency is incredibly important and also deeply insufficient. Information is not particularly useful if you don't have the leverage to take action on it. But, you know, in the current situation that we're in, the companies use opacity as a way to avoid regulation and as a way to tell the rest of us that we are simply incapable of understanding what is going on. And so they should be in a position to regulate themselves. And so there has to be more mechanisms for transparency about what the technology is designed to do, what kind of information it is collecting, what are the potential proxies within the technology that could act as discrimination. And I really believe that not just regulators, but also any employer who's buying these products off the shelf probably has an interest in actually understanding how they work in order to engage responsibly in the civic space. And so I think that we can't sacrifice the transparency question and just say, you know, it's just about worker power. Transparency is not enough. We need that. But we also do need worker power. And I think that what worker organizations can really do is, and what the labor movement has been the best at historically, is identifying the ways that power asymmetries show up in the workplace, addressing them, and really benefiting much broader swaths of people than just the workers that they represent. And so when we think about the workplace as an experimentation hub for the development of artificial intelligence, you could start to see unions or third-party worker organizations modeling what it means for many other contexts to have democratic participation in deciding the ways in which we deploy technology. You could see it translating to the use of artificial technology or artificial intelligence in renter-landlord relationships, in loan servicing, in helping with education outcomes and the ways that things are implemented in schools. Like, there are a number of ways that through worker power, we can model ways of addressing technology that end up benefiting us much more broadly. And that feels really potentially quite exciting and good for everybody.
Thank you. Any other comments on that one?
Yeah, I would just say, I think all the levers are going to get pulled. And in some ways, we're actually kind of doing some of this. So for example, I'll use the Department of Labor example. Around banning certain uses of full AI. So if you look at unemployment insurance, in the law, you cannot fully automate the process of who gets an unemployment insurance claim. There must be a human being at the end who decides that. I worked 2.5 years on unemployment insurance, and I agree with that. I think that makes sense. You look into actually in some of the military contexts, a human being is involved in some of those most critical decisions. So I think there will be some things that we think are so important that we're like, no, a human being must always be in that final critical decision point. I think on the transparency piece, and this is a place where I think there's a range of opinion. What do we mean by transparency? Do we mean transparency in terms of what's actually in the algorithm, or do we mean transparency in terms of how the algorithm performs? Do we want reports on outcomes? Do we want reports on how the thing works? Ranges on how that feels, but we should be precise about that. There are pros and cons to each one. And then I think that last piece, the worker power piece, is so important. And I use that, again, as someone who's been in the private sector, not just as a how do we mitigate harm, but again, let me use a labor example. If you look at your most high-performing manufacturing plants and factories in the day, it was the ones who asked workers, hey, how do we get this off the line faster? How do we flip over this mold faster? And the unions would figure it out. And they would be able to shave time off and actually make a more productive business that also was better for their members and more productive. So I think we're going to be pulling all these levers in certain ways. And I think it's about policymakers like Munir is now having the flexibility in concert with all the types of advocates who are on this call.
Thank you. I'd like to turn it over to my co-moderator, Terry Gerstein, to keep asking questions.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here. And I am coming to you from my office in New York City, and I have a summery scarf on, and there is a yellow cab on the bookshelf behind me. So I'm really happy to be here. So following up on this conversation, I want to sort of get a little bit more concrete and nitty gritty. So in terms of the policy proposals, Munir, you talked about a set of values that are animating the Department of Labor's work on this topic. But how does that, you know, and there was the discussion as well about that Chike, you said about, you know, some kinds of processes can't be automated, like unemployment insurance, but what kinds of actual policies, like concretely, what bills could be passed that would address some of this? And I guess I'll toss that to Munir initially to give some thoughts.
Thanks, Terry. I forgot to identify myself. I'm wearing a gray suit and a blue striped tie and glasses, and I have a blurred beige background. You know, I'm a little, so we have this, as I mentioned, we have this set of deliverables that the Department of Labor is working on that none of them are regulations, which is to say none of them will be kind of binding, but they do address different aspects of AI in the workplace and the impact on workers. And so that work is being finalized this month. And so I can't kind of talk about in any detail what's in there before that's out, but it might be helpful for me to say a little bit more about what those deliverables are, because it speaks to the different places where we're trying to at least address the impact of AI. So one, as I mentioned, is principles and best practices for employers and AI developers. And in broad brushstrokes, what I can say is that the idea there is to encourage high road practices by employers and developers that would involve workers in key decision-making processes in both the development and the deployment of AI. And would attend to things like transparency, would take seriously the concerns about displacement and ways in which employers, for example, are best situated to provide supplemental skills training to workers that allows them to stay in their jobs and maybe move up in a career ladder if their jobs are being changed by AI. Things like that, which are, again, being done. This will be a set of principles and best practices that are intended to set a high road for employers and developers, but won't have the force of law behind them. That's something that can only really happen once Congress acts. You know, a second area that we were charged with is developing a report for the president on what the policy tools are that are available to government agencies in the event of displacement. And what we were asked to do is to look at what the existing tools are, things like the unemployment insurance system, to look at past tools like the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, which was a program that has now expired because Congress didn't reauthorize it, but for decades provided a quite substantial set of programs and financial assistance to workers who were displaced because of changes in trade policy and foreign competition, as well as thinking ahead to if there were to be new legislation, what are the kinds of interventions that would be necessary. And I guess I'll just say on that, this is an opportunity for us to think broadly about displacement in the economy. AI is one, AI poses one particularly acute looming example or kind of challenge on the question of displacement. But, we only have to look to the bridge collapse in Baltimore to see that displacement happens in our economy with some frequency for lots of different reasons. And so there's an opportunity for us to think about whether it's through a natural disaster or human error or AI or a green climate transition or any one of a range of other changes in our economy. There's an opportunity for us to think about what should our social safety nets look like so that workers do not get the short end of the stick when there is a major change or transformation in the economy. And then briefly, I just mentioned two other of the deliverables which are relevant here because they do have the force of law in the sense that they are clarifications of the application of existing law in the event that AI is used. So one goes to something that Yolanda mentioned in her opening comments about use of AI or other technologies to monitor workers' conduct. And we were charged under the executive order to issue guidance that clarifies that where workers' hours or workplace conduct is being monitored, that work and that work is still subject to the wage and hour and overtime requirements of the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. So that's kind of an assertion of existing law to a somewhat new workplace environment. And then the last piece I'll mention in regard to this is that we also were charged with issuing guidance that clarifies that existing federal anti-discrimination law applies to federal contractors who may choose to use AI in their, for example, in their hiring processes or in their human resources processes. And again, that's just drawing upon the existing law, essentially to say that if you use an AI tool that has baked into it algorithmic discrimination that results in race discrimination or sex discrimination or age discrimination, discrimination on the basis of disability or another protected ground, that you as an employer bear responsibility, a legal liability, and that you won't kind of have any safe harbor because you use AI in that circumstance. So Terry, I know it's a little bit of a roundabout way to answer your question, but it's kind of, what I hope is that it points to a number of different places for intervention and a number of different places where we either already are seeing or can anticipate that AI will have an impact on workers. So really kind of trying to identify what the sites are for intervention.
Thanks, Munir. And following up on that, maybe this is a good question for Michelle. What can states and localities do? I know that New York City, for example, passed a law regarding use of AI in hiring and discrimination. Are there pilots or projects at the state and local level that we can point to and that might be promising in this area?
I mean, where I think we've seen states like California do some of the most thoughtful, future-focused work was in like multi-stakeholder convenings like the Future of Work Commission and other groups where people really got together and thought about what are the guardrails we want or what is the future that we want for workers. It shouldn't be lost on any of us that happened in California because there's already a really robust community infrastructure of groups that are labor focused, civil rights focused, civil liberties focused, and privacy focused. And so I think they were able to really push for that in their states. Otherwise, at the state level and the municipality level, what we've mostly seen in terms of Things being somewhat promising is a focus on anti-discrimination, is a focus on ensuring some amount of fairness in hiring. But there's not as we have seen so far, there hasn't been much around actually centering and building worker power into regulatory frameworks at the state level. And, we at the center have a hope that there might be a model at the state level for some experimentation with like a workers, not an official works council, but a workers council, small letters, where workers are actually able to provide first-person insights to regulators around the bills that they're considering as it relates to the workplace. We're really, really hopeful about that. I think that it's going to be a kind of wild and woolly world out there for the next couple of years at the state level. What I am hopeful about, because, the theme of this conversation has been, we don't know, is that different states testing different ways to really take this on starts to help us figure out like what are the right levers to pull and what are the right kinds of stakeholders to come together to actually come to the best holistic policy.
Thanks, Michelle. And maybe this is a good moment to bring Yolanda into the conversation as someone who has had experience with AI in your workplace. What kind of laws, are there laws or policies that the government could implement that you think would have been helpful, or that your employer could have implemented that you think would help AI be more positive and, less of a difficult experience for you and your colleagues?
Yes, this is Yolanda. I'm wearing a black dress in my office with yellow walls. Yes, so I think that my opinion on what laws need to be enforced, there should be certain restrictions on what AI can do. Such as if you have, like for me, a sales-based job, there should be certain things in line for it not to be able to do as, what I'm doing as the worker. I also think that we should be paid. It should be a law where we get paid for being testers, because we are giving out feedback, and that's how they're building the AI systems. I think the company should be more transparent. It should be, if you are using any AI systems, that you should be transparent with the employer, what AI systems are there and what it's meant to do and what it can't do, because it's not enough talk about AI in the workplace. So those are some of the things that we should get more pay, increase in pay, because if you look at it, AI is actually doing most of our work. So we're not getting as much as we did when I first 2006, because they have AI in place to handle most of the issues, to where the customer may never reach a human being. It's just basically going to be cut off from there. Like where I work at, AI is called Andy, right? Hello, my name is Andy. What can I help you with? You tell them what you can help them with, and it's going to stop right there. The customer trying to get to someone like me, it's either going to disconnect or route them to the wrong department. So, yeah.
Thank you. And for all of, I guess this maybe is a good question for Chike, which is, how does AI and the growth of AI affect different workers differently? Like we've talked about call center workers, we've talked about workers in business operations. You gave the example of loan officers, but there's like the wide swath of the economy as a whole, from, very low wage workers to, people in creative industries, as we saw AI as an issue in relation to the Hollywood strikes. Can you sort of give us a sense of how this is going to play out differently in different sectors of the economy?
If I had full answer to that, I would be playing the lottery or something else that required clairvoyance. I'll say a couple of things that make this different than other technologies that have come in past. Most other technologies, other types of automation, they have generally affected what we would call skilled labor. Think of your electricians, your factory workers, all those folks. What is unusual or different, very different, is that this technology actually, in some ways, has either left those jobs untouched or actually made them more important. When I was at the Department of Labor, and I'm sure Munir right now in his current role is hears from companies all the time, we cannot find enough welders, electricians, machinists, so on and so forth. And this is for critical industries like semiconductors, for aerospace. And so in some ways, those workers are not part of the conversation. The workers who are now much more part of this conversation, frankly, what we used to call white collar workers. These are workers that frankly we always thought were safe. Accountants. I know Munir is a I'm not sure if he's a recovering attorney, but I know he's trained as one. But I think things like document review. There are parts of what we call white collar that are now, frankly, there's a conversation about who is better to do that, whether it be this machine or whether it be a human being. So I think that is a really different change for other technologies compared to years past. The question is, what do you do about that in real time? Because again, these technologies are moving fast, but not so fast that they will replace all jobs tomorrow. Again, we've seen in real time, and again, Yolanda's talked about again the gap between what many of these tools can do and what a human being can do. The question is for those workers who are affected or whose jobs are changed, how do you help give them the skills to continue to do that job, one? And then secondly, how do you create those kind of thoughtful guardrails so that people know what's going on? Yolanda said a number of it. When is an AI being used in certain parts? That's something that people should know. How do we allow a place, like Michelle said, for workers to talk to management, as well as people who are making laws to say, hey, we are seeing that when AI is used this way, it doesn't work. We should think about doing things differently. In some ways, some of the best examples of labor management relations from decades past. So I think right now what is confounding a lot of people is the people who are affected are not the usual people who've been affected. And I think what we have to get our heads around, and I think, frankly, for those of us who kind of always thought we were safe, quote unquote, from these types of technological changes, I think we have to realize that this is something that truly affects everyone, and that everyone kind of has a stake here. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think that is the different cast that this situation has.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And I guess I'll just note also that I think that there's the question of technology and sort of like algorithmic management that we've seen in warehouses, for example, or in the so-called gig economy, where the boss is kind of an algorithm, and that is an element of AI. But I think that's a little bit different than what we're talking about today, which is more the generative AI that is kind of playing a role in all of the things that we've been talking about. Were you going to say something, TK?
Yes, no, I think that is a point that we haven't quite touched on, which is again how AI is used to surveil workers. Let's just use that term, but how is it used to manage workers? And I think this is a place, and I'll use one particular example. If you look at retail, I think the figure is 1/3 of workers in America don't know their schedule 48 hours to 72 hours in advance. If you were to, and the University of Chicago did this study, if you ask stores, why do you schedule people that way? And they'll say, well, that's how varied our customer demand is. We had scheduled people with this level of variability because that's how customers are. Well, when the University of Chicago actually looked, they said, no, it's actually pretty predictable how customers come in. So if it's predictable for customers, you can make it predictable for workers in terms of how you schedule them. And if you ask them, okay, why did you do this? It's because, well, we bought some software that actually kind of helped us do that. And for the stores, they were like, oh, this actually doesn't make sense. It's better for me to schedule someone far more predictably because they don't quit. They know what turnover costs, so on. So I do believe, at least there are examples, not always, but there are some examples where the tools will be counterproductive to the business's own aims. And I think it's going to be workers who actually point that out so that we can actually do better for the workers and for those businesses as a whole. There will not always be those types of win-wins, but they do exist. And I also think this is the right time to find them.
That's a great point. And, I think that is a great example of how technology can be used in ways that are degrading to working conditions and to workers' lives and work-life balance, and can be used in ways to the contrary that help workers and make their lives better. So we only have a few minutes left. I want to ask a question to each of you. All of you know more about AI certainly than I do, or many of the people in our audience. What do you think is one thing that would be most surprising to the general public about the impact of AI on the workplace. Just one thing that even really avid news readers, but who aren't really specializing in this area, would be that that would be interesting for non-specialists to know. So maybe we'll go in alphabetical order by last name. Chike, that puts you in the hot seat.
I was hoping for more time to think. I think the biggest thing to know is more thematic is that unlike other technologies, the people who made this technology don't totally know what it can do. This is different than every other tech that's ever been created. And so the testing point that Michelle and Yolanda have brought is really important. I'll use one quick example. If you use a Microsoft Copilot in Word and you ask it, summarize this document for me in one page, it'll do that. It'll provide you a one-page summary. If you change the question and you ask it, hey, as a friend, could you really do a good job summarizing this document in one page? You will get a slightly different product, which is interesting. Phrasing it as if it's a friend, like why would that make a difference to a machine? But it does. We don't know why.
Right.
To be honest, Microsoft doesn't know why. But that's, I think, a very big difference with this technology versus anything else that's come before.
Okay, Munir, you're next alphabetically by last name, and we got to keep it quick because I have one final, one sentence and question for each of you before we sign off.
Sure. Mine is very similar to Chike's, and I just add a little bit, a slightly different example. So because even the people who are developing this technology don't understand entirely how it works, it means that when AI is introduced in the workplace, there will be people responsible for using it or superintending it, managers, for example, who don't know how it works. And my recent most favorite example of not understanding how it works, the mysteries of AI, I just heard this on a podcast over the weekend, that there are AI models that will work slower if you tell them that it's December than if you tell them that's April. And this seems completely counterintuitive. You would think that they would just work at the same efficiency at all times. The best theory that they have to explain this is that they think that after having ingested all of the data and parameters available on the internet, that the machine has internalized the idea that you take a vacation in December. And so they've slowed down their work. So that's like the level at which this technology is inscrutable, even to people who are at the forefront of its development. And that in and of itself creates a whole host of challenges for its introduction into the workplace.
Thanks, Munir. That is also fascinating. Michelle?
I was doing a rapid Google search to try and get numbers to back up my claim. But anyway, I think it's really important to also acknowledge that a single ChatGPT query uses 15 times the energy that one Google query does, which is a way of actually saying that the environmental impact of artificial intelligence is astonishing. There is a ton of energy used and a ton of pressure on the electrical grid in order to make these technologies work. Data centers require an astonishing amount of water in order to engage in cooling. And, I have in the back of my mind when we're talking about whether or not artificial intelligence can be helpful inside the workplace, whether those workers are also living in communities that at the same time will be negatively impacted by that energy consumption. And that every single time we're making a decision about this, it's actually not just about what's happening in the walls of the workplace, but in the communities where workers live.
Thank you. And Yolanda, one thing that would surprise people who are not as experienced in relation to AI as you are.
Different types of AI. It's different types of AI. You have surveillance AI, the different types, and also just knowing that I think most people don't understand exactly what AI is and what it can do and how it doesn't empower the human being, because it's doing everything for you. So it's calculated, right? So if it's one thing off about it, then it throws everything off. So I think most people don't know that part about AI. It's different types of AI. and most companies use it to control the employee.
Right. Thank you. And one sentence answer to the final question, one sentence from each of you. What should people do to learn more and take action on these issues? Michelle?
They can read the Center for Labor and a Just Economy's paper, AI and the worker voice and the AI response. It is an overview of some of our recommendations about how to address it.
Munir?
Stay tuned for our deliverables on AI and the impact on workers coming out at the end of April. And all of that information will be posted on our website as well, dol.gov.
Great. TK?
Read a summary of the president's executive order on AI.
Great. Yolanda?
Just to be honest, I watch a lot of YouTube, like webinars, and just really engaging in what's next. So that's how I found out about AI. That's the only way I know how to look it up. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you to everyone. Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you to the Century Foundation and to NYU Wagner. I think this has been a really interesting conversation. A recording will be made available immediately after this on tcf.org. And thank you so much to our audience for joining. And if you want to learn about future events, please visit tcf.org and wagner.nyu.edu. Thank you so much for joining us.